Imagine standing inside a maximum security prison, not as observers, not as visitors, but because somebody said, we need peace in here. The steel door slams shut behind you, and you feel the shiver down your back as your body registers it before your mind does. The air smells of bleach, metal, and despair. You walk into a cinder block room, and in front of you are 15 cages. In each cage, a man, shackled at the wrists, shackled at the ankles. Men who have survived by never backing down. Men coming out of violent gangs who have survived by showing no fear. That was me in 2017. And I'm standing in front of these 15 men in cages to teach them how to become peacemakers and mediators to stop prison violence. I'm there as the co-founder of Prison of Peace because I had learned something counterintuitive. When you name what someone feels, the emotional temperature drops. Voices lower, people relax, and they become reachable. When you name what someone feels, it's the fastest way I know to listen at the level that calms the nervous system. And I call this listening someone into existence. Because you see, conflict is not a logic problem. Conflict is a nervous system problem. This revelation came to me some years earlier in a mediation between ex-spouses. $18,000 at stake. Each side had spent over $50,000 in attorney's fees and costs trying to destroy the other. Susan was so angry, I thought her teeth would break off. She was clenching her jaw so tight. And John was gripping the chair so hard I thought he would rip off the armrests. They didn't dislike each other. They despised each other. And I'm sitting there as the mediator thinking, what am I supposed to do with this? What do you do when words are nuclear weapons? And that's when the insight came to me. Listen to the emotions and name them. John and Susan were towering over me as I sat at the end of that conference room table, and they were screaming at each other. I stood up and I said, sit down. John, I want you to tell your story. Susan, I want you to name what John is feeling. So John started talking, and Susan immediately went defensive. Yeah, but. Susan, just tell us what John is feeling. So she took a deep breath, her shoulders dropped, her voices went from acid to neutral, and she said, John, you're really angry. You feel really frustrated. You feel completely disrespected. And I watched John's hands. And as Susan named his emotions, first one hand, then the other relaxed. And by the third emotion, disrespect, his hands were in his lap. His breathing slowed. He stopped raging. For the next 3.5 hours, I worked with them as they told their stories and listened to and named each other's emotions. And finally, John looked across the conference room table at Susan with tears streaming down his cheek and said, that's the first time you've listened to me in 25 years. They settled the case right there and then walked out calm and connected. I was shocked. They never once agreed with each other, not even a little bit. But when Susan said, you're disrespected, and when John said, you feel misunderstood, they weren't agreeing with each other. They were listening to each other and naming emotions. And when their emotions were validated, that's when things changed inside them, and they could find peace. Well, obviously, I'd stumbled onto something as a mediator, but I had no idea what it was. 2 years later, the science caught up. Neuroscientists call what I had discovered affect labeling. A brain scanning study out of Matthew Lieberman's lab at UCLA showed that when people looked at distressed faces and named emotions, the centers of the brain associated with negative emotions calmed down. They were inhibited. And the centers of the brain associated with emotional self-control in the prefrontal regions activated. Lieberman's study explained everything that I had observed. And I learned then that empathy is not agreement. Empathy is not weakness. Empathy is not softness. Empathy is nervous system leadership. It's naming what somebody feels from their frame of reference, not yours. So here's how you do it really simply. 2 words. If you go away from today's talk with nothing else, 2 words. You feel. Somebody's angry with you, they're upset at you, they get defensive. Simply say you feel. You feel angry, you feel disrespected, you don't feel heard, you feel invisible. And then watch for the body's yes. Nodding the head, dropping the shoulders, sigh of relief. And you're done. Here's how this played out a couple of years later. A woman serving a life sentence without possibility of parole in the largest, most violent women's prison in the world wrote a letter asking if she and the other lifers in the prison could be trained as mediators and peacemakers to stop prison violence. My colleague Laurel Coffer received the letter, called me, read the letter, and said, "What do you think?" 8 months later, there we were. 15 women in that prison, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, all of them serving long terms, lifers, life without possibility of parole. And I could see it on their faces: anger, skepticism, doubt, cynicism, and a little bit of curiosity. So we started teaching them how to become mediators and peacemakers, beginning with how to name somebody else's emotions. For 5 weeks, I didn't think we were making any progress until we heard Sarah's story. Sarah said, "I've been in prison for 18 years. I'm serving 25 to life for a fatal DUI. I killed a family of 4 as an alcoholic drunk driver. When I came to prison, I had to give up my 3-year-old son to my sister to raise. I've written him every single week for 18 years. He's never called, he's never visited, he's never written back. Last week, I decided to write a different kind of letter, imagining how he must feel having an alcoholic and prison killer for a mother. Angry, abandoned, unloved, humiliated, ashamed. Today, for the first time in 18 years, I received a letter back from him. And at the end of the letter, he said, 'Mom, I love you. I'm bringing my girlfriend, and we're going to come visit you in 3 weeks.' Her hand was shaking as she held this crumpled letter, and her tears had made the ink run, and her thumb was over the word love, as if she couldn't believe it. She could not let go of it because it wasn't real. She couldn't believe it. And that's when it struck me. We weren't teaching these women just to be peacemakers and mediators. We were teaching them how to restore their humanity. The success in that prison led us into other prisons until finally we were in some of California's darkest, most violent prisons, where we met those 15 men in cages. In prison after prison after prison, we heard the same stories, and we saw the same results. Violent fights and arguments were being resolved by naming emotions, not with fists and knives. Some of the most violent men I've ever worked with learned how to name someone into existence. So did those women serving life sentences. So did that mother who had lost contact with her son for over 18 years. If they could do it, imagine what it can do for you. In your marriage, in your kitchen, on your executive team, in a conversation you would rather avoid. Imagine never having a fight or argument spiral out of control again, simply by naming emotions. When I walked into that room and saw those cages, I thought the cages were the story, but they aren't and weren't. The real cages are the ones that we carry around inside of us every day, those moments when we become angry, upset, distressed, where we feel unheard and unhappy, and we lash out. We choose war over witnessing. You know, what really keeps me up at night is the feeling that we're losing it. Somebody votes differently, they look differently, they talk differently, and all of a sudden, they're not a person anymore. They're the problem. They have to be dehumanized, dismissed, made invisible. But what if, instead of dehumanizing and dismissing somebody, we listened to them and said, you're angry, you're frustrated, you don't feel heard. Not to prove them right, but to prove to us that they're still human. Because when somebody stops being human to you, evil becomes possible. When you name what someone feels, you choose humanity over ideology. You choose connection over being right. And maybe that's what we're all desperate for. Not to be agreed with, not to be right, but to be seen, to be heard. So the next time somebody is upset and gets snippety with you, don't defend, don't get reactive. 2 words. You feel. You feel angry, you feel upset. You don't feel heard. Listen someone into existence. You'll free them, you'll free yourself, and you will connect all of us.